1991 was a new year for NASCAR. Richard Petty was entering his 34th season as a driver and was looking to improve on his results from 1990. However, 1991 would not be much of an improvement for the 53-year-old Petty. A season filled with crashes and mechanical problems, the 1991 season would be difficult for Richard Petty, leading up to an announcement later in the year that surprised no one, saddened some, and gladdened others. So, let's take a look at part 4 of the final years of Richard Petty's career, 1991. 1991 started off with NASCAR introducing 2 new rules. The first rule being a new pit road safety procedure after a pit crew member was killed in the season finale at Atlanta in 1990. NASCAR wanted to make pit roads safer. This new rule stated that while under caution, drivers could not pit for tires. Then, when the pits would open under green, officials would wave a blue flag to allow odd-numbered cars to pit first, and then the officials would wave a flag with an orange stripe the next lap to allow even-numbered cars to pit next, based on their starting positions. If any driver would violate these rules, a NASCAR official would hold the driver in their pit and give them a 1-lap penalty. The drivers would get a 15-second penalty if the car overshoots the pit stall, and if a crew member goes over the wall too soon as well. Man, that was confusing. The drivers had mixed feelings about this new rule, including Richard Petty.
At Daytona or a bigger track, I think it's got a better chance of working than it has on a shorter track. So it's all up in there. Everybody's just going to have to go out and run just as hard as you can, do the best you can, and again, if circumstances are right, the way things fall, then you'll be all right.
The second new rule was called the Petty Rule. In 1989, when Richard Petty failed to qualify for 5 races, ratings dropped that season. The Petty Rule allowed past series champions to claim the final starting position in a race if they were too low in points and if their qualifying speed was too slow. Many fans today know this as the past champion's provisional. Richard Petty's 1991 season started off with him qualifying 14th for the Daytona 500. Since Petty's sponsor STP was also sponsoring the Daytona 500, Petty was featured on that year's 500 program. Petty lined up 7th for the first Gatorade Twin 125 qualifier, and from the drop of the green flag, Petty had a fast car. On the first lap, Richard got a good run going down the backstretch and picked up 3 positions and moved up to 4th, and by lap 23 was up to 3rd. With the laps winding down and the sun going down, Petty made his move on Rick Mast for 2nd and set his sight on leader Davey Allison. With 10 laps to go, Petty was closing on Allison, but Hutch Strickland, driving the number 12 Ray Besto's Buick, started to battle Petty for 2nd. With 2 laps to go, Strickland got ahead of Petty, but a crash in turn 2 that involved Dorsey Schrader and Sammy Swindell brought out the caution, and the leaders raced back to the line. Petty had a huge run on Strickland coming out of turn 4, and with a lap car in the way, Richard dove to the inside to make a pass and just inched past Strickland at the line to finish 2nd. With Petty finishing 2nd, this moved him up from 14th to 3rd on the starting grid for the Daytona 500. The green flag waved for the 33rd running of the Daytona 500, and Petty did not get off to a good start. On the first lap, Petty lost 5 positions, and by lap 14 was running in 17th. By lap 151, Petty was running in 13th, but on lap 184, Petty made contact with the 90 of Robbie Gordon on the backstretch, causing severe damage to the rear end of his SDP Pontiac. The crew managed to piece the rear of the car back together just enough for Richard to go back out. Richard would finish in 19th, 5 laps down. After having a poor qualifying run, Petty would improve his season best finish by finishing 11th the next week at Richmond. Petty qualified 25th for the 3rd race of the season at Rockingham, and on lap 158 made contact with Harry Gant, setting off a 4-car wreck in turn 1. Petty finished 15th, 7 laps down, moving him to 14th in the standings. The next 2 races would see Richard DNF with engine problems, both at Atlanta and Darlington, finishing 38th and 37th. Those 2 DNFs would drop Richard to 27th in the standings. For Bristol, Richard used his past champions provisional for the first time and lined up 33rd. On lap 287, Richard made contact with the 11 of Jeffrey Bodine in turn 4. Petty finished 17th, 4 laps down. At North Wilkesboro, Richard would use his past champions provisional for the second week in a row and once again lined up in 33rd. This race would be a rough day for Richard Petty, as he would be involved in 3 separate cautions. On lap 214, Petty would spin in turn 4. Then on lap 230, after running inside the top 10, Petty would spin in turn 3, dropping him to 21st in the field. And then finally, on lap 322, Richard would spin in turn 1. Petty would go on to finish in 16th, 3 laps down. Martinsville was next on the schedule. Richard started 12th, his best qualifying run since the Daytona 500. Petty had a strong car all race long and managed to stay inside the top 15 and would go on to finish 14th, 5 laps down. Petty's race next week at Talladega ended early, as on lap 2, going into turn 1, Richard made contact with the 41 of Larry Pearson, causing Richard to slap the outside wall and sending Pearson sliding through the grass and back into the outside wall. Later in the race, Richard's son Kyle would be injured in a spectacular crash on the backstretch. Kyle would suffer a broken leg and would sit out until September of that year. Richard would drop to 27th in the points. The next week, NASCAR was in Charlotte for the Winston. A Winston Legends race for retired legends would take place on the track's quarter-mile infield track. Elmo Langley would hold off Cale Yarborough and Paul Goldsmith for the win. Richard was not able to compete in the Winston, and again had to compete in the Winston Open just to race his way in. Petty would finish the Open in 6th, and would not race his way into the Winston. Richard qualified 24th for the Coca-Cola 600, and was enjoying one of his best runs of the early season. Richard would run inside the top 10 for most of the race, and would move as high as 8th, but with just 17 laps remaining, Richard blew a right front tire and slammed the outside wall almost head-on. Richard would climb out of the car unhurt and would DNF in 20th, his 4th DNF of the season. The Budweiser 500 at Dover, Richard started in 31st, and by lap 37, he had moved up 10 spots to 21st. Richard would finish in 17th, 6 laps down, and would move to 23rd in standings. Richard lined up 39th for the Banquet Frozen Foods 300 at Sears Point. As the field was coming down to take the green flag on lap 61 after a caution the lap before, Richard was leading the lap down cars. Leader Tommy Kendall, who was driving in relief for Kyle Petty, immediately passed Richard going uphill into turn 1. 1 lap later, as Richard went into turn 1, he attempted to slow down and allow second place runner Rusty Wallace to pass him. While doing so, Petty's brakes locked up and Richard went off course and slammed nearly head-on into the concrete wall and tire barrier. It took several minutes for the safety workers to get Richard out of the car. Even Kyle arrived on the scene on crutches just to check on his father. Eventually, Richard climbed out and was taken to Sonoma County Hospital as a precaution. He would be released, but would be on crutches for a few weeks. At Pocono, Richard started 23rd and was inside and outside the top 10 most of the race. On lap 147, the 24 of Mickey Gibbs spun in turn 1 and hit the outside wall. Richard, having nowhere to go, spun into the infield, causing minor damage to the car. Richard would rebound and finish in 11th, his first lead lap finish of the season. Michigan was the next race, a track where Richard seemed to have great speed the last few seasons, but today, Richard wouldn't have that speed. He would run as high as 24th before falling out on lap 166 due to a broken valve spring. Richard finished in 35th, his 6th DNF of the season. July 6th was the day of the Pepsi 400, 4 days after Richard's 54th birthday. Richard qualified in 21st and would finish in 22nd, 1 lap down. 2 weeks later at Pocono, Richard would again be caught up in a frightening accident. After qualifying 17th, Richard had a strong run and a fast Pontiac, and found himself running inside the top 10, getting as high as 6th before the disaster struck. On lap 71, Ernie Irvin got into the left rear of the 12 of Hutch Strickland and set off a massive 8-car wreck on the front stretch, Richard had nowhere to go and ran right over the left front fender of Bobby Hillin Jr., who was driving his son Kyle's number 42 car. Richard nearly went upside down in the wreck. Richard would get the STP Pontiac repaired enough to go back on track, but on lap 97, would wreck hard in turn number 1. Richard finished in 31st, his 7th DNF of the season. Richard would rebound the next week at Talladega. Richard started in 20th, and on lap 105 would be caught up in an 8-car wreck in turn 1. Richard would recover enough to go on and finish in 18th, 1 lap down. NASCAR then made the long trip up to Watkins Glen for the Budweiser at the Glen. Richard qualified 31st, and by lap 6 was beginning to move up through the field when tragedy struck. Going into turn 5 on lap 6, J.D. McDuffie, driving his cell phone number 70 Rumpel Furniture Pontiac, suffered a mechanical failure on his Pontiac and collided with the 52 of Jimmy Means. McDuffie would spin towards the tire barrier and we hit the barrier so hard it launched the car into the air and would land upside down. McDuffie, who was 52 years old, died instantly in the crash. As the race resumed, Petty continued to move up through the field and would come home to finish 9th, his first and only top 10 finish of the season. And this 9th place finish would also prove to be the 712th and final top 10 of Richard Petty's career. NASCAR returned to Michigan, where Richard would finish in 23rd, 5 laps down, then had a solid run at Bristol, finishing 9 laps down in 12th, and then charged from 30th to finish 16th at Darlington, 4 laps down. At Richmond, Richard started in 19th, and on lap 22 would get caught up in a caution with Joe RUTTMAN, and both would spin into the infield. Richard would continue on, and on lap 58 would go on to lead his first lap of the season. In fact, this would be the only lap he would lead all year long. Richard would go on to finish in 24th, 7 laps down, and would move up 1 spot in points to 22nd. Dover the next week would be a challenging race for the drivers. 40 cars started the race, 17 of them finished the race, and 23 of them DNF'd. Richard was one of those DNFs. On lap 70, Richard would be caught up in the big one on the backstretch. The crew managed to piece the car back together just enough for Richard to go back out. Later in the race, on lap 389, Richard would blow his engine and would DNF in 20th. Richard moved up to 21st in points. A week later at Martinsville, Richard started 29th and on lap 161 made contact with Ricky Rudd in turn 1. Richard backed into the wall, causing significant damage to the rear of the car. The crew made some repairs and sent Richard back out before he would bring the car behind the wall on lap 348 and finishing in 30th, his 9th DNF of the season. Richard started 33rd at North Wilkesboro after using his past champions provisional for the 3rd and final time, and on lap 219 was involved in a bizarre accident. Going down the backstretch, Richard made contact with the 19 of Chad Little, causing Richard's car to climb over the side of Little's car and get up on 2 wheels, and then ran over the part of the infield access road and got airborne again. Richard had minor damage to the right front of his car and would bring the car home to a 19th place finish, 4 laps down. 2 days later, Richard would hold a press conference. On October 1st, at the Petty Enterprises shop, many big names were in attendance, including North Carolina Governor Jim Martin, NASCAR President Bill France, and a few executives from RJ Reynolds, Pontiac, and STP. Many rumors were floating around that the announcement was for 2 reasons. 1, Petty would retire to seek a seat in Congress, or Petty would retire after 1992 and become manager of Chrysler's proposed racing team. President George H.W. Bush and Chrysler Corp. President Lee Iacocca were scheduled to attend, but were both unable to come. Then came the announcement that surprised no one, saddened some, and gladdened others.
It will be my last year next year, and it will be known as a fan appreciation tour.
Many expected Richard Petty to retire after 1991 due to his poor performance. Richard had actually been talking with his sponsors the year prior about plans to retire, but Petty elected to run just 1 more season in 1992, calling it his Fan Appreciation Tour. After the announcement, there were still 4 races left in the season. Charlotte was the next race. Petty started 39th, and after spinning with Sterling Marlin in turn 2 on lap 18, Richard would finish 12th, 5 laps down, and at Rockingham, Richard finished 16th, 7 laps down. Richard started 20th at Phoenix, and on lap 90, was taken out in a 5-car wreck on the front stretch, causing serious damage to the front of his car. Richard would pull behind the wall and would finish 41st, his 10th and final DNF of the season. We now come to the final race of the 1991 season, the HARDEE'S 500 at Atlanta. Richard started 30th and would come home to finish in 22nd, 9 laps down. So, that's a wrap on Richard Petty's 1991 season. Comparing 1991 to his 1990 season, this season was a small improvement. He finished more races, 19 out of the 29 races, and improved in points as well, finishing 24th. He did, however, lead less laps, only leading 1 lap and finishing on the lead lap twice, with only 1 top 10 finish. His average finish for 1991 was 22nd, improving on his average finish from 1990, which was 25th. After his announcement on October 1st, many fans were questioning as to why Richard Petty would want to run one more season and not just retire after 1991. The answer? Because Richard didn't feel right about just retiring like that. He wanted to give something back to his fans, who supported him throughout his career, which is why he called his 1992 season the Fan Appreciation Tour. Now, you are all probably wondering, what was his 1992 season like? Well, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. That's a story for another time. Tune in next time for the final chapter of the final years of Richard Petty's career, 1992, the Fan Appreciation Tour.